Welcome to Everything Hurts and We're Not Dying in Broncos country. It's That's Good Broncos. And we got a guest today, Zach Seegers, is joining us to discuss some finagling of the salary cap numbers and how it's not just possible that the Broncos could move on from Russell Wilson, but it actually would make sense for them to cut him this offseason. So I saw Zach tweet this a month ago, and I did a video on it. I'm doing a video on it. Don't know when I'll upload which. So we decided to have Zach on today. Zach, tell people where to find you on Twitter and about your podcast, because if you wait till the end, ain't nobody going to be listening. So do it.
Appreciate the advice. Yeah, going to be the math and salary cap rules guy, so I got to get him quick. At Zach_Seegers on Twitter. I've got all sorts of other tidbits about this whole crazy Russ debacle and the rest of the Broncos there. And then the Let's Talk Broncos podcast I do with Bree Maestas and Joey Richards, who are some other great Broncos analysts. 5 days a week. We'll go to 3 days a week in the off season, and can catch us live, can catch us on video on YouTube, Facebook, all that good stuff, Twitter, and then audio wherever you listen to podcasts.
Cool. So Zach and I have played football a handful of times here in Denver. So I trust him just based on that alone.
Because you routed me up.
What's that? Because I'm faster than Zach, but definitely not taller. I thought, let's just get into this. Because, all right, so Hackett gets fired. Uncertainty's in the air. We're under the impression the Broncos are going to bring in an experienced head coach who's going to sell the team on how they can fix Russell Wilson, which I don't think is a bad idea. I think Russ should definitely get another chance this coming season. But I understand why you'd want to move on from him based on what has happened this last year, based on even Shannon Sharpe kind of going torched earth against the Broncos and Russ as a locker room presence. Like, if Sharpe's going to do that, it probably means there's some issues there. So just why don't you tell us how you kind of started stumbling into the numbers, what needs to happen to get rid of Russ this offseason, and how that, based on your shrewd roster moves, would actually free up salary cap space in the process with some of the other cuts along the way. And then we'll figure it out after that. Yeah.
So I think, like everyone, I heard, well, the Broncos are stuck with Russell Wilson. You know, this season's gone off the rails, but they're stuck with him. And so I just started getting curious.
Years. They have
exactly
100 years.
It was like, man, things are looking dark for these next 5 years. And honestly, I think it came from, I'm a Colorado native covering this team. I like to see the team do well. It's good for my job. It's good for my heart and soul. And I was like, man, how long are we going to be in this like nuclear winter for? And so I started looking into the numbers, like, okay, it's probably totally unrealistic, but what would even moving off of him look like this year? Like, how badly would you have to blow up the team? And what I learned is you don't really have to blow it up that bad at all. It sounds crazy. It's very unconventional. So I understand why people have a hard time accepting it. But the math says, like, if you look at it, it's very possible. I did tons of research on what a post-June 1st cut is and all the machinations of that, how NFL restructuring rules work, and the machinations of that, looking at what other quarterbacks are making around the league and how you're able to build a functioning roster while also devoting that much salary cap to the position. And I realize it's very possible. It's like, it's painful. It's not ideal. It's something that hasn't been done in the NFL before, but it's very, very doable. It was never done before that a team picked a quarterback in the top 10 and then the very next season took one number 1 overall. That was the right move for the Arizona Cardinals. It was wildly aggressive and unconventional. Sticking with Josh Rosen would have been the right decision. It's time to get wildly aggressive and a little unconventional.
Yeah, and I mean, long term, now there's equal questions about Kyler Murray, but definitely was the right move for them. And if we're looking at this, like you're saying, you can blow up a little bit of the roster because there's going to be casualties. It would be like if you currently were in Russell Wilson's home and you're like, you know what? We could blow up 4 bathrooms. We're still going to have 10 and we can get by.
8 bathrooms.
Yeah, we can get by with 8 bathrooms.
Yeah.
So
or like if you were in a sketchy mob deal or like an in-debt bad to the mob and you showed up and they're like, we're going to take one of your fingers. And it's like, oh, just one of my fingers. Okay, that's bad. But I thought like I was going to be in a cement swimming pool or something.
Yeah.
So it's all a matter of perspective, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So you tweeted the Broncos could have like 74 million in cap space by cutting Russ at the post-June designation, which basically just allows a team to spread the dead cap money, right?
Over 2 seasons, yes.
Over 2 seasons. And also like all the dead cap money doesn't count towards the salary cap, correct? Or does it?
No, it does. Well, so what you have to think about here is dead cap is just a cap space allocated to a player. It becomes dead because that player is no longer on the roster. So the Broncos are already paying Russ 58 over the next 2 seasons here, 57 point something, 58. So when you talk about that 107 number, it's not 107 on top of that 57, 58. It's 50 on top of that 57, 58 because that's what is left on the contract after these 2 seasons. So this year it would eat up 39.5. The splits on this would be 61 this year and 46 next year. The split I laid out in that thread you're referencing that would free up 70 million in cap space is also a doable one. I think you would want to eat more of the dead cap in 2023, a season that kind of already projects to be sketchy. Use 2023 to start rebuilding the offense. You know, all those, you don't have many draft picks, but use the draft picks you have, trying to find some offensive pieces. Use the salary cap space you will have to try and find some offensive pieces, but kind of take the brunt of it in 2023. And then in 2024, you're only losing $10 million against the cap relative to what you'd have with Russell Wilson on the roster. So that's not that hard a pill to swallow. And then I think the Denver Broncos, if they were to follow my philosophy and you look at the young core, they could be competitive as quickly as 2024. I think if you drag it out with Russ, you're looking at not being competitive until 2025, more like 2026. And so that's the thing. I like the blow up. People are like, I don't want to wallow in bad Broncos football for any longer. I think it's the only way to not wallow in bad Broncos football for a long time. Cause I think the longer you draw it out with Russ, like Hackett was weighing him down, but how do you blame Hackett for those Rams interceptions? Hackett's not telling him throw it into triple coverage 2 yards over Cortland Sutton's head. You know, like
we don't know.
Purely on Russ. It's fair. But, I would bet he's not. I bet that's kind of a Russell Wilson problem. And I think there's a lot of those mistakes this season. There's a lot of mistakes that are Hackett related, but I don't think you're improving Russell Wilson to the point that he's worth $50 million a year. And at that point, it's like, okay, can we get out of this before this hole gets deeper? Because as he's on the team, more guarantees go into effect. On the 5th day of the next league year, he gets his entire 2025 salary guaranteed. And to avoid that, you're also going to have to like bench him for some games in 2023. It's a weird deal. 107 million is definitely painful, but this is the shallowest the pit will be. It's a deep pit still, and it's gross, but this is the shallowest the pit will be. So dig out now before it gets deeper.
And I want to point out too that the NFL record for the largest dead cap in NFL history, $88.8 million this year with the Atlanta Falcons. And they're not bad. They're not a terrible team either.
And they're in the process of a rebuild. They're adding the Falcons model is a great model, and I'm glad you brought it up. The two I would look at would be the Eagles and the Falcons. The Falcons is a more realistic expectation, but the Eagles is another. Both entered 2020 with so much dead cap. It was like, how are they going to be able to build a roster? Like, how can they even do this? 2 years later, the Eagles are a one-loss team and a Super Bowl favorite. 2 years later, the Falcons don't have their quarterback in place, but you look at, they found a head coach that's offensive minded and really, really clever and is doing some exciting things. They found like a few cornerstone pieces on offense and defense to start building their franchise up around. And they're in a much better place now than they would have been if they were trying to, get more out of Matt Ryan, as we've seen with what's happened with Matt Ryan and the Colts this year.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I wanted to ask you, Zach, what do you think? Because it's kind of something that happens in the NBA when kind of bad teams with a ton of space will absorb these huge contracts if you ship a pick with them. And I think the only time we've actually seen it effectively done was 2016, 2017 with Brock Osweiler. What do you think that would look like in this scenario?
So that's the exact thing. I've been arguing the cut Russ point because if we can all get on the same page that cutting Russ is at least possible, which again, the math says it 100% is, then we can talk about the options that are better than that. Because trading, obviously that's out of the Broncos' control. It takes two to tango there. They're going to have to find someone that wants to trade for Russell Wilson, wants to absorb some of that contract, and that might be difficult. So let's just look at what's in the Broncos' control. They can cut him and move on. To your question, yes, ideally they should trade him, and I think they absolutely could. Carson Wentz, who was a very clearly depreciated asset, unlike Russell Wilson having, a bad year, Wentz had 3 bad years, was also known as a locker room cancer, also had a pretty ugly contract that someone wouldn't want to take on. And Washington traded 2 third-round picks for him. It would be... My microphone just disconnected. I'm pivoting on the fly. I will fix that. So sorry about that. You can find someone that'll take the Russell Wilson deal. It might look like Brock Osweiler, where you're not even getting any picks. You are giving Russell Wilson and draft picks up. I'm not as familiar with that because I've been so zeroed in on cutting. But there, I think you're looking at a dead cap of around 86, 87, something like that with a post-June 1st cut, which lines up right with that Atlanta Falcons deal. And then you're talking about stuff that's really manageable. Then you're talking about $20 million against the cap this upcoming season. Okay, that's like signing a big ticket free agent. If the Broncos keep Russell Wilson, don't you think they're going to be looking at investing $20 million across maybe the running back room, the offensive line, the receiving room, the defensive line, some areas that are going to be needs this year? Probably they'll invest $20 million across those spots. If they're not in a win now window, you can reallocate that $20 million to moving off of Russ and setting you up for the future. I think the 2 big pushbacks I often get are, well, what's the team going to do in 2023? And they'd have to blow up the entire roster. The team will be bad in 2023. I believe they're going to be bad with Russell Wilson anyways. What moving off of Russell Wilson now does is it goes, okay, 2023, again, for my philosophy, is going to be bad or disappointing, not a Super Bowl team, any way you slice it. So now that we know that 2023 is not winning a Super Bowl, let's use this non-Super Bowl season to take our medicine, eat our vegetables, and get ready for 2024, 2025, 2026, where if you do this thing right, you can be competing for Super Bowls. Right. Roster turnover can happen that quick in the NFL. Blowing up the roster. The moves you're having to consider are cutting Chase Edmonds. They're probably going to do that anyways. Cutting Graham Glasgow to free up $14 million. $14 million for Graham Glasgow, they're going to do that whether or not they get rid of Russ. The one dodgy one, Jacob Martin, another one for $6 million. They're going to do that. The one that's dodgy is Ronald Darby, but with how well Damari Mathis played, that pill becomes easier to swallow. And Ronald Darby's also an injury-prone 29-year-old corner coming off an ACL tear. Freeing up $10 million by moving off him, even devoid of the Russell Wilson conversation. Let's say you're keeping Russell Wilson. I might want to move off of Ronald Darby so I have $10 extra million to address Javonte Williams insurance, to address replacing Dalton Reisner, et cetera. So I don't think any of these moves are that hard to swallow. And it gets you to the point where you can not only cut Russ, but cut Russ and have enough money for like a Draymond Jones extension, if that's what you want to spend it on. You could cut Russ and have enough money to build up the offensive line for whoever that next quarterback ends up being. It's not this complete doomsday that it's been made out to be.
Yeah, I would say the real dicey one in my eyes is where do you have cut Brandon McManus?
Uh-oh.
First of all, we never cut anybody who shares my name. Second of all, I think finding a kicker is a little bit trickier than a lot of these positions.
Also, he's the only current Bronco who's appeared on this show before. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Fair. I think McManus had a great run with the Broncos. He was one of their all-time kickers. But I think when you look at the metrics, he's been not that great this year. I like DVOA.
How do you say that about our leading scorer, Zach?
You literally have
kickers are generally leading scorers.
God,
the kickers are generally leading scorers. He was a great player in franchise history. Rod Smith's the all-time leading receiver. Maybe don't have him start for the 2023 Denver Broncos. He's a great franchise legend, and I love me some Rod Smith, but I don't think he should be starting for the 2023
Terrell Owens
Denver
wants
Broncos.
to come back at 49. I'll bring back Rod Smith at 50, whatever.
I like it. So DVOA, which factors in things like elevation, weather, the type of protection you're getting on the kicking unit, has him as the league's 24th best kicker this year. And he's the 10th most expensive kicker this year. But here's the great thing about my philosophy that I've laid out. You do not have to do all of these moves.
Right.
Again, he is a Russell Wilson cut, and that $17 million against the cap was for a different split I was calculating, with the $61-46 million split, which I think is preferable. It's 39 against the cap. Those moves I listed save 70. And it's not all the moves that the Broncos could do. There's other moves that I felt were a little more aggressive, would be harder to sell people on. And I didn't want to be dying on those hills. I just wanted to prove how possible it was.
Right.
So like the McManus one only frees up $3 million. Okay, keep McManus. If you want to keep McManus, I'm not going to put up that much of a fight over that. Keep him. And now you free up 66 when you only need 39 instead of freeing up 70 when you need 39. So that's not a big difference. You can totally keep McManus. You are a big Lloyd Cushenberry fan. You think Butch Berry gave him a raw deal. You can keep him. Even if you want like some of my more aggressive moves like Darby, that's a big $10 million chunk. There's enough wiggle room that like if you're the number one Ronald Darby fan, you think that three-man cornerback room of Surtain, Mathis, and Darby is going to be sweet and you really want to see that happen, awesome. You can cut Russell Wilson and have that happen. Cutting Russell Wilson is an easy enough pill to swallow that there's a very surprising amount of flexibility in that conversation.
I think that was my big takeaway because like, would you be able to restructure Darby?
You could. So that's the other one. I went with the cut Darby because there was a sizable enough gap there. But I think you still save up $6 million with a restructure. That's off the top of my head, but it's in that neighborhood.
And like restructures, obviously the player has to be willing to play ball, and Darby coming off an ACL injury, like he might be willing to do that. And I think an area you can never have enough depth is at corner. So let's say like you do something like that. Maybe it's not 70 million, but you walk away with 50 million. You're still sitting in a good spot. I don't know if you looked into this, but the video I'm putting together, I said I would consider trying to trade Cortland Sutton instead of restructuring him because I think, one, he has value where you could get a draft pick or two in return for him. And that would be another way you could free up like what's he set to make? I don't know, like 18 million or
there's some tricky stuff.
He's got like a friendly contract, which would make trading for him, I think, even more appealing, which is I've kind of flip-flopped on. I think the Broncos definitely should keep Jerry Jeudy because we've seen what he could do when Brett Rippon throws him the ball. It's just like get the guy the ball and he's going to make some fucking plays. But Is something like that possible in your theory here as well?
Extremely possible. I want to see that I have the math on this right. Okay. Yeah, it's very doable. It would be a good way to free up extra money this year. I think it would kind of be a wash in 2024 based on the splits I'm seeing right now. I can't see all the different ways to split up the post June 1st stuff. I don't think you'd see the trade pre-June 1st. You can designate, I believe, 2-3 players as post-June 1st moves that aren't actually post-June 1st moves. And Sutton could be one of those. Maybe they come up with a trade during the draft and then, it gets executed on June 1st or something like that. If they do that, it would free up $14.5 million. So that's extremely doable. And you brought up the Darby restructuring and how it takes players playing ball. And that's very true. There's cases where I get the impression that maybe Garrett Bowles wouldn't be super excited about restructuring, but generally speaking, restructures aren't the toughest sell to players. All the restructures I've done, and there's different kinds of restructures, but the ones I've laid out are max restructures, which means you're not taking any money out of that player's pocket or off the table for that player. You're actually doing the opposite. You're taking unearned, unguaranteed salary money and turning it into guaranteed signing bonus money, which lets you play some funny cap games that lets you spread it out over a longer period of time. But you look at a guy like Cortland Sutton, or I think Tim Patrick's on that restructure list. I think Garrett Bowles is on the restructure list. And like I said, Garrett Bowles might be apprehensive to it, but you look at guys that are nearing 30, all of which have had a serious injury, whether it be a broken leg or a torn ACL. And you go, hey, this money that you could potentially lose, we're going to not only guarantee it to you, but we're going to put it in your pocket today so you can put it in whatever investment portfolio you have and start making money off your money. Most players will say yes to that.
Yep. I think I nailed it on the head by trading Cortland Sutton.
I think you did. That was one I wasn't as open to. Now it would be it would free up 14 mil this year, and then it'd be a wash next year. You still kind of have that Sutton contract on your books, and you wouldn't be profiting off of it. But it would definitely make the Wilson cut easier this year.
And you could probably get some draft picks for him. The last question I have, Will, let me get this one in before I forget
go ahead.
is because I saw someone saying this really screws 2024 in that you don't have a lot of guys actually on the roster still. What is that scenario like? I saw somebody say you'd only have 26 players actively on the roster right now. But I think the number would be higher than that because you're freeing up cap space and you're going to use that to sign current guys before you let them hit free agency. And then also your draft class, your undrafted free agency signed after the draft. You're going to make up for some of that. You're not going to be walking into the next season with all of this cap. But is this a situation where all these numbers come together in 2024, you don't have much of a roster?
No. So that was with the old split I was working with. And that was the problem with that 33-77 split. And that was because I was trying to see, I was going in again with the mindset that this is impossible. The cap size, it's not even workable for this year. And then reading, and also I know you guys are having me on to check my math, making sure I'm not full of, you swear on this, full of shit.
We're not going to check your math. You say it's good.
We don't know how to check.
Sounds good to me.
But here's the great thing. You don't have to because the foremost cap experts already have. Jason over at Over the Cap, and I forget the author of the Spotrac one, but one of Spotrac's top analysts. They both have articles on how the Broncos can move off the Russell Wilson thing. Now, they both say it won't happen this offseason, which I agree with. I ultimately think the Broncos don't do this. I'm more arguing for the fact that it's possible.
Right.
They say the same thing. They say, it won't happen this year. I doubt George Payton would make such an aggressive move that makes him look bad. But there's nothing in there about how it's financially impossible. It's very financially viable. The top people have looked into it and agree. And so with those 33-77 splits, it would be a problem because you get that $77 million cap hit, which is a crazy thing to eat in 1 year. And it would kind of gut the roster a little bit. But with the 61-46 splits, it's very easy. In 2024, you're only eating $10 million of cap space that isn't already being eaten by Russell Wilson. So you're only taking away $10 million of what you've already got at your disposal. As it stands now, we're not worried about the Denver Broncos being able to field a roster in 2024. It's not like, oh my God, they're going to only have 30 guys. They'll be fine in that regard. And the difference there isn't $10 million. You mentioned it with the draft class. They have, as part of the rebuild, they'll have even more picks, but they project to have, 14, 15 picks between now and then. So you get 26 plus 15, that gets you to 41. And then you're going to have some cheap free agents, maybe a UDFA here or there. And it will be a little bare bones, but the nice thing about being a rebuilding unit is you find pieces. Like the Lions are in the middle of a rebuild right now. They just found a UDFA or 7th round pass rusher because they were in the position to play in big snap. They're like, whoa, this James Houston guy can start for us. He's awesome. Yeah. You don't want to be a bad team, but that's one of the advantages to being a bad team. And yeah, it wouldn't, in 2024, I think they could actually be competitive. My plan is, again, eat the medicine or take the medicine, eat your vegetables in 2023, and then you'll have a high draft pick. You can take Drake May, who would be the number 1 overall pick in this year's class. You could take Caleb Williams, who would be the number 1 overall pick in this year's class. And then you're really investing the same in that quarterback that you would be in Russell Wilson. And that quarterback, I confidently believe, is going to be so much better than Russell Wilson. So as quickly as 2024, the Broncos should be in a better position than they are in right now, just at the cost of making 2023 a little more painful than it already projects to be. But also, Broncos country, you'll have your expectations in the right place for the first time since 2014, 2015. Every year, think about it. Going into 2016, Brock Osweiler and/or Paxton Lynch are the future of the franchise, and the defense is ready to win a Super Bowl, and we're going to just keep coasting. Peyton Manning wasn't even giving them all that much last year, and it's going to be great next season. And it was a lie. And then it was Joe Flacco is still in his prime, and it was a lie. Case Keenum is this guy who led the Vikings to the NFC Championship. He can do that in Denver, and it was a lie. The Broncos country has had their expectations fail them for 7 straight years. And I think that more than anything is what has been so painful. I think a bad year where the expectation is okay, this is going to be a bad year. Let's just see what fun, exciting pieces, like a Jerry Jeudy, we can unearth this season. I think that would make it less painful, honestly.
What do you got, Will? You had something.
No, I was going to say, and this is kind of a non sequitur at this point, that I just don't know that Courtland Sutton has the value that you think he does at this point, Brandon. I think Jerry Jeudy probably has all the value there if we're going to pick one of the 3 receivers, and I really don't want to trade him. And also, Zach, I think one last point is I wanted to ask if you did all these calculations on a chalkboard at Harvard University. Where did you do this?
Yeah, I did
slide ruler.
I did that, and then I went to a bar, and some long blonde hair kid tried getting in my face.
Tell me to eat his orange. How do you like those oranges, kid?
I did it while producing a morning radio show, actually, and they were talking about how the Broncos were stuck with Russell Wilson, and I was like, let me prove these guys wrong, and started calculating it out, and it turned out they can do it. Freedom is possible, Broncos country.
Well, I mean, there's this narrative about the NFL salary cap isn't real until it is real.
It's kind of real.
It's there, but it's real, but it can be manipulated. Much like Broncos fans every offseason, it can be manipulated. And just by saying the restructures. So once a contract's signed, we know there's flexibility in that contract, even if it's ridiculous. And then earlier when you said, you can make some moves for post-June cuts that aren't actually post-June cuts, just tells you how much flexibility the NFL gives itself to unfuck a bad contract situation. And if they could figure out how to get out of this, Russ, and do it, then I will never be surprised by any contract move, cut, trade ever again, ever. Because like most, I thought there's no way you can move on from this for at least 3 to 4 years. And then Will and I started talking about your tweet again. I was like, well, maybe let me look at this again and maybe we can make a video about it. And then glad you were able to come jump on the podcast today to explain to everyone that even though it probably won't happen,
could happen.
Maybe. And this is, it might happen. And my thought is during the head coaching interview process, if Greg Penner's takeaway from that is the experienced coaches that I want to come in, if they're telling him that they don't think they can win with Russ, then he'll fucking rip the Band-Aid off immediately.
Fully
if that's
agree.
what it takes to bring in the guys like he thinks can write the course. But if they say, hey, we can do these things and manage and move forward with Russ, like we think there's something, I think the process of the interviews is going to help educate his decision. And I'm sure they have somebody in their department looking at the numbers who's already told them, yeah, you can get out of this if you want. This is how. I would hope to God
1,000.
they have somebody smarter than you, Zach, and I think you're very smart.
1,000.
But on staff with the numbers saying these are all of your options right now.
1,000%, and I'm sure they are doing that right now. I feel confident. Like you hear, like George Payton slip up, like Russ or whoever the quarterback is, they're already thinking, and I don't think that means they're doing it, but I think that means that they're aware that there's a possibility Russ isn't the quarterback next year.
Right.
And your thing about the interviews is dead on. It is going to come, in my opinion, to whatever the head coach they pick pitches them on. And I don't think what the pitch is in regard to Russ is going to determine who the head coach will be. I think they're going to just go for the overall vision, like what coach they like best overall. And okay, what is their vision with Russell Wilson? Is it they think he's reparable and they can get him back to form, or do they think it's time to move off? And I think the Broncos will probably do whatever they want to do. I also want to say the 107 million number, because I forgot to mention this point. I know it's a scary number. That's not up for debate. The Broncos are paying Russell Wilson at least 107 million. The debate is how long do you want to be financially tied to Russell Wilson? I want to be tied to him for the minimum amount of time. So I'll eat that 107 in 2 years rather than 107 over 3, which is what you get if you cut him after next season.
Boom.
Good point.
You got anything else, Will?
No, I think it's been covered.
All right, Zach, thank you so
much.
much for joining us today. We appreciate it. We always like when somebody else does the math for us.
Yes.
Fucking facts, adding and research, not our cup of tea. At Zach_Seegers on Twitter. Give him a follow. Check out his podcast. And yeah, that should be it.
Yeah, that's all for me. Everyone go check out my podcast and everything if you want to hear me angrily rant about this situation more.
Hey, and if you want to be less confused by the numbers, why don't you check out our friends and sponsor of this show, DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, DraftKings is giving all new customers who use our code DNVR when you sign up at DraftKings a chance to turn your wager into $150 in free bets. All you got to do as a new customer is bet at least $5 on any pregame moneyline wager. And if your bet hits, you get 150 in free bets, and you don't even need to know all of the math like you do to understand the salary cap. Basic numbers, very simple, easy to use, safe, secure, reliable. You can deposit and withdraw your money whenever you want. Again, that's code DNVR for new customers at DraftKings. There's information in the description below. So read it and read it carefully. Okay. Read every word of the legal disclaimer. Okay. Thank you. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. Okay, Will, that's how we can get rid of Russell Wilson if we so choose. And by we, I mean you and I, because we make all the decisions for the
Yes.
Broncos, as everybody knows. Based on what you know, would you cut Russ this offseason?
Based on everything I know, I would not.
I agree.
I think I've laid out my plan, my master plan here before.
Yeah.
And there's a lot less math involved, and it's more just me going off of instinct.
Yeah.
I would keep him for another year and say this is the make or break year. I would trade back out of the first round and collect more picks. I might even trade a player, try to get another pick. And if you suck, you might be lucky enough to be in position in 2024 to take Caleb Williams or Drake May or Quinn Ewers if he ends up being good, or whoever, really. Yep. But you at least give, we've outed the scapegoat in Nathaniel Hackett. And we're going to say, all right, by process of elimination, we're going to see if he really was to blame, rather than getting rid of two of the major core pieces of the offense in one fell swoop. I think Russ deserves another chance, just based on the 10 years that preceded this Titanic level disaster of a season. I think he's earned the benefit of the doubt to some extent. And I just think that this will happen too, because when you take the big wild card is ownership. And I think from what I heard the other day, they're very much aware how impatient we are, because this isn't, this season is such a calamity in a vacuum. But when you throw it in as year 7 of a 7-year playoff drought, and year 6, I think, of not having a winning record, then everything compounds. And I think it's a hard sell to do what Zach said. And while it makes a lot of sense, and it might very well be the right course of action, I don't think that ownership is willing to totally punt on a full season.
Yeah, I think Russ deserves that chance, and I think the right head coach coming in can help. And it's mostly just like a philosophical approach, I think, that you adjust for your next 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with Russ, if you get into this season and he's not good, in terms of how you build your team, you're not looking to build your team to be a contender now. You're looking to build your team while Russ is still there for the future, right? So instead of maybe dumping a bunch of money into some splashy free agents, or being aggressive with a trade or something like that you think, oh, we're in the Super Bowl window with Russ, you're selling some pieces, maneuvering that way while still having Russ. So you're still paying your quarterback to play for you. And I think that's more of the tactic they would use. Even if he's there for 2024 and 2025, and you still draft a guy in 2024 and have him, behind Russ for whatever that's worth, it's just about shifting the way you build around Russ versus just moving on from him immediately. Although I think Zach made a good case for why you might want to do that. And just knowing it's possible, I think, is a little bit relieving. But personally, I want to see another football season with Russ in Denver for a lot of reasons. But an example I'm using is Sam Darnold right now is getting a lot of praise in Carolina, and he's not doing much. He's not throwing any interceptions. He's throwing one touchdown a game, and for his most passing yards is 250. But what the fuck are the Panthers doing? They're blocking really well with their offensive line, and they're running the ball down their opponent's throats. If you can run the football with Russell Wilson, I think you can win a lot of football games.
Yeah, it turns out Steve Wilkes might actually be a better coach than Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah, and Matt Rule for sure.
And Matt Rule, too. Mm-hmm. He might be pretty good. He might be on the list if Carolina is silly enough not to make him the full-time head coach.
Ooh, is he the Broncos' next head coach? Did you just predict that?
I don't know. I think he should be in the mix.
Yeah.
If, his players love him. Clearly, they're playing hard for him.
Yeah. I mean, Carolina.
It's too bad he couldn't win with Josh Rosen. I mean, that's not really a big mark against him at this point, is it?
Nope. And Carolina, just look at the Raiders. Don't do what the Raiders did. They let Rich Bisaccia go after he galvanized the team in a tumultuous season. Simple.
I mean, we've got plenty of time to talk about that. Obviously. I don't know if, and you brought it up, but I don't know if they do draft a guy in 2024, I think they'll find a way to get Russell Wilson off the team entirely in 2024.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I
get the spirit of what you're saying.
If you're paying him and you want him to play and you don't want to throw your quarterback out there right away, you're already accounting for Russ being on your team those seasons, and you're accounting to build around him for those. It's just the way you might have done that. Instead of building around him now, you're building a little more on the young side for the future.
Yes.
Right? That makes sense.
Yeah, and you're building a different type of football team too, I think.
Yeah.
Where we thought this is going to be just an aerial attack. Just let's get 4 wide receivers out there and run 4 verts all day. Yeah. That is not going to work. And they need to play more like the 2018 Seahawks, where they're running the ball 25 to 30 times a game. Yeah. And limiting Russ's attempts, even if he doesn't like that, because it's clear that based on previous experiences, that was not really up his alley. But it turns out that what Russ wants versus what Russ needs are 2 entirely different things.
Yeah, it's a lot of whether Russ stays, I think, is going to depend on whether he convinces Payton and Pinner and the new coach that he's willing to do it their way.
Yeah. And we'll see if that ends up being the case. I think the last thing I wanted to say about it, and then we can pick the games, is I think the reason that I wasn't totally on board with an in-season firing of Nathaniel Hackett is based on circumstances. You're going to have to give whoever the next coach is a long leash, because they have to know what they're in for. It is the most fucked situation in the NFL currently. It just is.
Maybe the Cardinals, but yes.
Yeah, and the Cardinals, I think, is more attractive than ours. Although there's more clearly, if you join the Cardinals, you might get framed for sexual assault.
Yeah,
too, so.
that's the big one.
Yeah, as long as you're okay with that, the football part of it isn't, totally a deal breaker in my opinion.
No, I'd rather work with Kyler than Russ right now if I'm a head coach.
Yeah, definitely. We could just stack them and make one tall quarterback.
Give Russell's on. Whoa, yeah. Russ is on top. Kyler's on bottom, and they can use either arm for throwing.
Yeah. We have to get them a trench coat though, or else the NFL might not let them play.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's why I didn't like necessarily the idea of firing Hackett before the season's over, because then ownership is telling the next head coach, you don't mess around, you better win now. And that's just it's not gonna be easy for whoever steps in.
No,
it's gonna be an uphill battle, to say the least.
I agreed with that when we talked about it last, and I'm at the point where I can't remember if I talked to Grossi about this or you.
Yeah,
but
it's okay.
based on their press conference, it sounds like the coach coming in is going to have a lot of power. It sounds like George Payton, some of his power is going to be relinquished. And I think if you're going after a big name head coach who's had experience, like, I don't even know if these guys are real, but like Payton or Harbaugh, if you're going after those guys and you're telling them we're going to give you all of this control, then it becomes appealing to them because it's like that feeds their personality type. I don't even know if that's the right move, but I think the fear of, being one and done is kind of alleviated if you're coming in and you have all of this power, because there's more under your control versus, well, my success depends on the GM doing the things I want. And if George Payton's not going to do the things I want, then why would I come here knowing they fire a coach every year? I think it was clear, by saying that, they're going to be very okay with that coach having the same kind of control like Mike Shanahan had that ultimately got him in trouble. But I think that's the only way you can do it. But you're right. It's a stain on that job right now. But money and power might
solve everything. We definitely have money.
Yeah.
Power, in terms of power, you're like, presiding over a village of morons at this point. So the power is only appealing if you really want to wield absolute power over a 4-11 football team. Yeah.
And did they fire the O-line coach and Stukes after we podcast last time or before?
After, because it was Rosberg who personally said, "Get your ass out of here."
Oh, he fired them?
Yeah, that was like his first move.
Oh, damn.
He said that in the press conference. And people were connecting the dots too, that because Rosberg's obviously, he was the longtime special teams coach in Baltimore under John Harbaugh. Little connection there for you. And when he was hired to be the game management specialist, someone asked Dwayne Stukes, are you going to lean on Jerry Rosberg's experience with special teams just to help you out? And Stukes basically said, no, I've got my guys that I already talked to. I talked to Mike Mallory and I talked to Joe DeCamillis, not on the team.
Yeah. Who was a good special teams coach when he was here, though.
Yeah. But he said, no, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah, and I saw that clip of Stukes.
The first thing he did was fire him. So maybe, I don't know, maybe he should have. But the special teams has been pretty abysmal regardless. But maybe it would have been better with a little more influence from Rosberg. I'm excited to see what it looks like against Kansas City, because Kansas City has with Dave Taub.
Dave Taub, the all-time. He was considered for head coaching gigs for a while. That's how highly he's regarded.
I interviewed him back in 2017.
Vance Joseph era.
That would have been a better move than Vance Joseph.
Yep.
Almost certainly. Yeah, so I'm excited to see what it looks like. I'm excited to see. We might just get destroyed by the Chiefs. That's the most likely outcome, but I want to see how the team comes out with Rosberg, because his regardless of what Mike Silver says, I don't care what Mike Silver says. He's an old dirty hippie, and I don't care anything about him. Jerry Rosberg's statement in that press conference, I thought was great. And if you're listening and you haven't seen it or listened to him speak yet, I would recommend it, because he is part coach, part philosopher. He's someone you just want in your life, I feel like. And he seems like the perfect interim head coach to get us out of this.
Amazing. And so he's got a connection to Harbaugh by way of Baltimore, which the other Harbaugh has been brought up as a possible coaching candidate.
Yeah.
Ejiro Evero coached with Jim Harbaugh in San Francisco.
Mhm.
So there's a couple ties there.
I think George Payton and Jim Harbaugh have
A connection as well.
I think so.
So maybe there's a bigger possibility that actually happens.
And of course, Condoleezza Rice.
Oh yeah, Condi. Oh, Condi Rice.
She's going to be involved in the head coaching search. That was her first wife. Yeah.
Harbaugh
He helped him
execute
recruit.
the plan for the war in Iraq.
Yeah, little did you know that Jim Harbaugh orchestrated the I was going to say the assault on bin Laden, but that's not even the right presidency at all.
No.
That was
Harbaugh captured Saddam Hussein.
He might have.
As far as I see it, that's what happened.
I can't rule it out. Just like imagine that might be the most terrifying thing is for Saddam if he's holed up in a bunker somewhere and you see. Have you seen that clip of Jim Harbaugh through the officials cam, the referees cam?
Yeah.
That face coming towards you, ready to apprehend you and bring you to justice.
Or he just looks crazy.
Sweet Jesus, that would be terrifying.
Yeah. So I think next week we'll talk more about the coaching candidates we'd like to see coming in here to Denver. Appreciate you guys listening. The picks episode's already up. We did it very quickly, briefly. Just not putting it in today's episode because it was yesterday.